Whew. Hi everyone, Sweathany Gland Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Tyler, the Creator album, Call Me If You Get Lost. Yes, this is a brand new album from rapper, singer, producer, director, writer, doer of things, Tyler, the Creator, hitting us with his sixth studio album, his first for this decade, which follows his most successful release to date, both artistically and commercially, Igor, a love triangle / breakup album that explored touches of R&B, lo-fi, and soul, alongside the kind of weirdo rap that Tyler is known for. And it went to #1 on the charts. So after such a huge conceptual release, the question is, where will Tyler go next? And ingeniously with Call Me If You Get Lost, Tyler's not trying to force lightning to strike in the same place twice. While he's not going super narrative with it this time around, in a way this project still ends up being artsy, left field, holistic, and uniquely Tyler. Now, as the teaser lumberjack forecast, the bangers are back now, they're really back. And for those of you who are not in the know, DJ Drama screaming his brains out on that song was not an isolated incident. No, he is all throughout this album, hyping up every corner of it, and for good reason. If you know DJ Drama's history, he tends to represent a certain sector of the hip-hop world. So considering that, his inclusion in Call Me If You Get Lost makes sense, because much of this project runs like a grimy mixtape you download off of Dat Piff like 10 years ago. The way I look at it, Call Me If You Get Lost is like a mansion that Tyler is building on this project, and DJ Drama is just an amazing centerpiece sitting in the living room, like a really extravagant, crazy piece of furniture. But going down this grimy mixtape road is also why Tyler has features on here from 42 Dugg, Lil Wayne, as well as, surprisingly, NBA Youngboy, who he pulls an amazing performance out of on What's Ya Name. Tyler even throws it a little bit back to his Odd Future days with Damogenesis on the track Manifesto. And in a way, it does feel like Tyler, as far as his lyrics and vocals and general energy are concerned, is throwing it a bit back to those Odd Future days. Specifically that Wolf and Goblin era, but executing it with the maturity, expertise, and finesse he's gained up until this point. With that being said though, this record is also a massive flex. He's just such a different person now than he was in 2011, and his success has essentially become his narrative. But you can't really say he hasn't taken full advantage of that. Between his albums, his work with other artists, his festival, his clothing line, and while Tyler has been critical of braggadocious rappers in the past, at least he waited until his ducks were in the neatest and longest of rows to go this hard. The opener, Sir Baudelaire, eases us into this project with curious layers of horns and plucky melodies, as Tyler paints this picture of luxury and refinement. The whole thing sounds like a dream packed with eccentric and eclectic details. Even in the midst of excess, Tyler's a man of taste. Following this song though, we have a pretty tight succession of heavy hitters in the track list. There's Corso, where lyrically we have Tyler slickly talking his shit with all these one-liners over a whirlwind of jazzy piano fragments, booming drums, and group chants. And sure, in terms of meaning, it may not be as deeply layered as anything off Igor is, but in so many ways this track is coming back to the foundational elements of hip-hop to begin with. Clever wordplay, visceral energy, huge instrumental, all delivered in that typically Tyler way. The following Lemonhead comes off like Tyler's own version of a blaring trap banger with a minor key and brassy synth horns. The 42 Dugg feature just adds to the song's nasty attitude. Meanwhile, What's Ya Name is like a groovy R&B throwback. It's a seductive, feel-good, summery jam that feels like hanging out poolside with a hottie all day. The beat has a sweet but chaotic feel to it as well. It's like Tyler's casually singing and rapping over what sounds like just a radio snippet of some oldies, with some vocals and various sounds of this kind of just being thrown on top of each other in a controlled chaos sort of way. Ty Dolla $ign's guest vocals are great, but really the stunning performance on the track is NBA Youngboy, who comes off way more passionate and sensible over this kind of production than I thought he would be. Meanwhile, the track Hot Wind Blows is packed with all these dramatic, jazzy piano and flute samples. Production really sounds like a combination of like some Madlib and Alchemist shit. The vibe vibe and the lyrics feel so rich, like Rick Ross could be on this track easily, but I will totally settle for Lil Wayne in rare form, as he speeds up his flow quite nicely at one point, even dropping gems like Wind Beneath My Wings, Desert Eagle Underneath My Coat. This somewhat ritzy fever does break around the midpoint of the record a bit though. We have the song Masso where the bass, the drums, and Tyler's flow just feels like Goblin all over again, which sort of makes sense because the song is a meta moment where Tyler lyrically is explaining his progression a bit, even going into the shifty sound of Cherry Bomb, and how his perspective personally and artistically changed to get him to this point. There's also a really manic and explosive finish to the track too, where Tyler does come off a little nutty, like he did on a lot of that early work he put out back in the day, and I wonder if still at this point does he have trouble relating to his audience or feeling like he's speaking to the audience that he wants to. Then Run It Up also feels like I've taken a time machine back to Goblin Town, as this track runs like a really blissful, feel-good interlude from that album, but maybe not as rough around the edges and wild. Lyrically, this one feels like another stretch of the same victory lap, but now with Tyler juxtaposing this against his past a bit more. The refrain is beaten to death a bit, and it does take a fair amount of time to get going, but I do like the way the instrumental switches around the halfway point into what sounds like kind of a bad bit-crushed MP3. Sort of a different approach to the lo-fi thing for Tyler, and it was a smart move. Then the following Manifesto feels like an aggressive response to any attempts to force Tyler to be like a role model of sorts, speak up on social and political issues, which he doesn't feel an obligation to, especially since there was a time when he was kind of like enemy number one in the music world and was getting canceled before there was cancel culture. All in all, I think his response and I think his statement here is pretty well put together and also passionate. Clearly, Tyler supports efforts to change policing and get rid of police brutality and so on and so forth, but he doesn't want to come in here as like some sort of moral arbiter and be making decisions and be making statements, speaking over anyone necessarily, or taking the lead. Then we have an insane centerpiece on this record, which comes in the shape of Sweet / I Thought You Wanted to Dance, which is a two-parter. Obviously, the first leg of it is this synthy R&B blend, which has a solid tune and a great performance from Brent Faiyaz on vocals. Like, if you separated this off from this track, this would be one of the most solid songs on the record for sure, just on its own. But then we get this really curious transition into I Thought You Wanted to Dance, which radically shifts into a somewhat dubified reggae direction. Yes, a reggae Tyler track, complete with quirky organs and a really rock-steady beat. Instrumentally and aesthetically, these two tracks just feel like really weird, sweet leftovers from the Igor vault, but obviously couldn't make it onto the record because lyrically they don't contribute to the narrative of that project. But they're just such fun tracks, and I love the way that they kind of melt into each other, and the instrumentation just feels so hazy and fun and colorful. And together, these two tracks rack up like 10 minutes of runtime, but each section is so well partitioned off that as we kind of go from part to part to part, it doesn't really get boring, it stays engaging. Now from here we move into a somewhat spotty last leg that has a couple of interludes. There's one that features Tyler's mom talking with him for a little bit, and even though it's not a very long portion of the record, it is a really endearing portion of the record. Just hearing her speech patterns, the way she talks, and kind of referencing back to a past moment in their life together, it says so much. It says a lot. It says a lot about Tyler's personality, his upbringing, even the way he talks. They talk so alike, from their cadence to their word choice, and I mean, of course that's nothing new or different or weird for parents and children, but to hear it and see it kind of contextualized in that way puts Tyler in a new light, I think, for a lot of people that may just sort of see him in a vacuum. The song Rise brings more brags to Tyler's success doctrine here, while also telling us he's gonna do stuff that you tell him he can't do, but honestly, he's kind of driving this angle into the ground at this point. But Juggernaut is an insane banger where Tyler, Uzi, and Pharrell bounce off of each other quite well. The song Wilshire is the second longest here at 8 minutes and change, and And you might have caught lyrically earlier on the LP Tyler alluding to this scenario where he's playing the role of a homewrecker, I guess. He's kind of inserting himself into a relationship with someone who's already got somebody, and he doesn't care. He's trying to assert himself, get this person to date him instead. And Tyler essentially gives us the detail by detail rundown of this whole situation and his ball of emotions that he's been left with in the aftermath of it. And yeah, again, he goes through this whole story for 8 minutes with a somewhat like totally fucked mix. Like for some reason the right channel is really fuzzed out and kind of clipping, and there's a lot of record static in there. The other channel has mostly Tyler's voice and a good chunk of the instrumental. I mean, I guess it was an interesting little story to add to the record, but God, is it kind of a slog. Then the closer, Safari, features this grand abstract instrumental with a lot of weird horn and jazz chops, lo-fi bass as well. Once again, this track to me feels like musically controlled chaos. There's a really hungry delivery from Tyler in the second half. I'm not crazy about the pitched chipmunk vocals at the start, but I will say they sound better than they did when Tyler was trying to pull this exact kind of thing off at the start of his career. Yeah, I think his verse on this track is solid, and he comes off convincing, leaves us with a lot of energy, but I imagine it's kind of a difficult task to give us a summation or really kind of, you know, put a bow on a record like this, where it's just kind of like, this is me, 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 this is the me hour, this is everything going on with me, I'm so great, I'm so great, I'm so great. I guess in a way he's leaving us with a determined snapshot before he pops up in our point of view once again. Overall, Call Me If You Get Lost, I loved it, but maybe only about as much as I could love something that is such a vanity project. So much of this thing hinges on Tyler's personal success narrative, his personality, his character, his likability, and in that regard, he as an individual is still far from perfect, but my God, he has improved leaps and bounds beyond where he was at the Goblin stage for sure. The way Tyler produces, writes, raps, and dissects and describes his world is just so much better than it used to be, and I think even he is well aware of that. I'm feeling a strong 9 to a 10 on this thing. Hell yes to this album. Hell yes.